Hello and welcome to the Youthwork Plus podcast. I am Becky, your host, and I'm joined today by Dave Boden, who is from his main role is at Grace Foundation. And I kind of connected with him, I think, a couple of years ago. We sort of connected over the internet. I think it might have been during COVID, actually. Was it?
I think it was. The first time was during COVID when you were just starting Youthwork Plus.
Yeah. So we've been friends a little while. But yeah, I'll let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit more about himself.
Yeah. So I'm Dave. As Becky said, lead Grace Foundation, and a little bit about Grace. The vision of Grace is to help transform young people's lives through holistic education. So most of our work is spent in secondary schools, and we have a team of about 40 staff working across 12 secondary schools, several of them in Milton Keynes and the surrounding areas, also up in the Midlands as well. And what we do there is essentially, in many ways, it's old school youth work repackaged for the 21st century in a way that sort of aligns with school outcomes, and we have a great time with that. I'm also father of 4 children. All of them now either been teenagers or are teenagers themselves. So there's a little connection there. And I'm an author as well, and have created many resources along the way.
Oh, amazing. And how has God kind of led and moved and changed you along the way? What's been your sort of youth work journey of getting involved with young people? How's that? How did it all happen?
Yeah, I always say that I've been involved working with young people since I was one. So my childhood basically was pretty idyllic in many ways. Spent in Yorkshire, growing up until the age of 10, absolutely fantastic. Had an amazing upbringing where it felt like back in the day in Yorkshire in the 1980s, felt like you could roam everywhere, do everything, and like kind of king of the world, really.
Yeah.
And then when I was 10, we moved to a different part of the country. We moved to Leicester, which had quite a big impact on me in terms of just feeling like your whole world's been uprooted and trying to find my feet again. So coming into my teenage years, I really struggled myself as a young teenager. But 2 things happened. One is I had people who were church youth workers come alongside me and support me. And second is I remember being in this church meeting when I was about 14, and the person at the front of this church meeting said, I don't just want to see the same old faces back next year, you know, when we gather again. I want to see your friends who are like the lost and the broken people who don't know Jesus back here. And I actually didn't know that there was people that didn't know Jesus. Because when you've grown up in sort of a church community, I just thought that was the way it was for everybody.
Yeah.
So I guess being impacted by youth work myself, I then was like, well, what about my friends? And went on this journey to really become passionate about mission and reaching young people. So at 16, started to work on a rough estate in Leicester, in a place called Braunston, where the vision was to basically reach every young people on one street. So we did youth work on a single street. It was a really, really long street. It was quite incredible, actually. So we ended up working with young people in different ways. And then at the age of 18, then started getting it volunteered for a summer camp, which was the same summer camp, the same camp where I'd been really impacted before. I ended up volunteering at it. And year one was asked to volunteer and get the fireworks for the Friday night display, did it. Year 2, basically, the guy said, who was leading it, said, I'm finishing it. And unless somebody steps in to lead it, this whole thing is over. So there's about 200 teenagers at this camp. I'm 19 years old. And I'd heard it was going to go, and became a little bit indignant and frustrated that this amazing camp was going to finish. So I waited a couple of weeks and went to the leader and said, look, if no one else will do it, I'll do it. And actually, so at 19, ended up taking on leadership of this summer camp with 200 teenagers and 30 volunteers. So I always describe that my leadership journey was a bit of a baptism of fire, really. Like if ever you want like a book on how to make mistakes in youth ministry, like I could definitely write 15 of them, I'm sure. And that led on to leading that for several years, ended up pioneering lots of youth projects then in the neighborhood where I was living. So that thread of young people and mission has kind of been through everything, from the big stuff to like leading camps, to then the small stuff, like we used to do detached youth work on the streets, working with very troubled young people, started a youth club, started a table tennis club. So in many ways, I've probably done most of what the listeners, and like almost every type of youth work under the sun over the years, and eventually leading to the point where I ended up leading Grace Foundation.
Yeah. And what's the biggest lesson you think you've learned from youth or kids work?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned along the way is that you've got to have two things in place. I think first of all, you've got to have a passion for Jesus, you've got your own passion for God, and you've got to have your own walk with God, right? It doesn't work just trying to rely on other people's. It doesn't work just trying to rely on the work itself. But the second thing is you've got to have a passion for young people. And like, I remember one time when I was leading a youth group in Cardiff, when I was at university, we were volunteering there. It was 4 a.m. and we were cleaning up pizza from the urinals. And like the next day, like we went to the church leader and we were like, we're going to quit. We're never going to do this again. This is awful. And he just looked at us and just went, suck it up. This is what it's like, you know, and that's a silly example of a hard time, which wasn't really a hard time, but there's probably been loads of times along the way when, you know what it's like when you're working with young people, it's tough. When you're working with grown-ups, it can be tough. And the thing that keeps you persevering is vision, is having that vision for young people and almost like a relentless commitment to them. Because I think the next generation, it has to be more than a platitude of like you're doing that thing just because you want to fill a gap or doing it just because you feel like it meets a need in you. You've got to be driven by that passion for young people. So that's probably been the biggest lesson I've learned along the way. And to be honest, that's what still drives me today. It still burns as strong. I guess because I was so impacted by youth work myself.
Yeah.
It becomes a bit of a lifelong passion in a way. Like you can't get away from it. And I've actually done church leadership for 11 years and ended up coming back to the thing that, you know, it's like you want to do that connection of somehow impacting young people.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you got any ministry highlights from your time in ministry?
I think for me, one of the biggest highlights has been the work that we've done with Grace Foundation over the last 3-4 years. So that was originally birthed out of working in some free schools called Grace Academy in the Midlands. And the structure and model is we have like a youth worker, a family support worker, and a leader who are all Christians who are embedded into that secondary school. And they're like, theologically, they're like salt and light, working alongside the school community. They do everything with, nothing to. That's another big lesson there, I guess, partnership. Yeah. And it's like being the hands and feet of Jesus to that community, to the staff and the students. So for me, seeing that grow in 2019, I was asked to expand the vision from these free schools to then take it to 10. So early 2020, we started to do that, then got hit by the pandemic. So had to figure out, how do you be a schools work organization when there's no schools work? That was good fun, as I'm sure you remember that yourself. Because that was, I think, when you guys started developing Youthwork Plus a lot more was in that season. Yeah. So I think for me, the highlight has been seeing what God's done in terms of expanding that vision into lots of different schools. And it's like every time we get a new partner school on board, I always kind of like have a bit of a high five moment, because you think that's another 1,000 young people who are going to get to hear the message of Jesus, or another 1,000 young people who are going to be able to be supported with their character and well-being and help them build healthy relationships. And yeah, I love all that stuff. You know, like, I guess it's like, if we're going to do stuff, we might as well go for it, right? Yeah.
And how many schools is Grace Foundation in now?
So we've got 12 at the moment, one more on the way. And we reckon that we could probably get to 15 to 20. And then at the moment, we're just looking at how do we, with that core work we've got going on in the schools, how do we become a blessing to churches and charities beyond to help take some of that good practice that's going on? I guess because when you're cooking in the kitchen, you learn all that side of it and say, how can we help other people as well? But I'm learning every day in this, as I'm sure, you know, you are. It's just like, you constantly have to take the approach of being a learner, don't you? Otherwise, you just like I carry this. I carry a little dinosaur around with me, like everywhere I go.
Yeah.
I haven't told many people this, so you're getting a secret here, Becky. And basically that dinosaur represents like not wanting to become extinct. So, and we have this phrase amongst the team of "don't be a dinosaur." So quite a few of our team have got these little dinosaurs. So we're constantly looking at how do we stay fresh, how do we stay current, and make sure we keep evolving to meet needs along the way. And that means you've got to be a flipping learner, because so many mistakes that you make along the way, you've got to constantly adapt and keep growing.
Yeah, it's constantly being aware, isn't it, of what's happening around you as well as what you're trying to do and how that's fitting in with it.
It's very easy to get caught up doing your thing, or also get quite tunnel visioned with it, which is the danger, isn't it? Like when you are a visionary person, you can end up getting tunnel visioned, which is not good. So everybody should carry a dinosaur around in their pocket.
Yeah, it's a good little reminder.
It is.
Yeah. And how did you end up in your role at Grace Foundation? How did you get there?
So when I was about 2006, 2007, I'd ended up moving into a neighborhood in Coventry. And when we moved into that neighborhood, my wife and I were like, what's going on for young people? Heard there was not a lot going on. So we decided to start something, probably a bit of a running theme here. We're just like, let's just do it. And we pioneered a youth project into a little community called Potter's Green. Did that for several years. So we had a youth club of about 40 young people back in the day when youth clubs were a thing. And we're working with young people in that area. And then at the same time, the local school that I was near, that lived in the neighborhood of, we were doing a little bit of work with it. But I remember walking by it one day and seeing a bunch of teenagers getting off this school bus. And I felt what was probably the closest I've ever had to the audible voice of God. It wasn't the audible voice of God, but it was certainly something happened to me where the phrase like just came out of the blue, like sheep without a shepherd, about those young people. And it hit me like visceral. I can still feel it when I talk about it now. It viscerally hit me inside. And I was like, wow, where did that come from? And that sort of led me on a journey about that school. So I started praying for it and really feeling that God was like leading us more to it. And through a series of miracles, really, I ended up working in there. And somebody ended up contacting me and saying, look, we've heard about the work you're doing with young people in the area. We're starting this thing called Grace Academy. Can you come in to do the youth work in that school? So that youth work led to them being on the leadership team of the school, becoming an assistant principal. And then they asked me to oversee the youth and Christian ethos development across the 3 Grace Academies at that time, which then led me to the expansion. So it's the age-old thing of like, if you hang around long enough, you end up in charge. I don't actually know if that's complimentary or not, but I've been involved in Grace for 16 years now.
It seems like you've accidentally been the leader of things quite a few times.
Basically, that is the story of my life. Yeah. You end up accidentally falling into stuff. It's definitely a running thread. I suppose it's like when you, like half the life were driven by passion, right? And the other half were driven by frustration, and probably the same thing. So you end up like really feeling like, oh, this needs to happen or that needs to happen. And it's very easy for particularly youth work community to just go, somebody else needs to do it. And eventually you have to just go, oh, like, okay, let's go for it. That's why I try not to get any more vision nowadays, because it just, like every time you create a monster, you got to feed it, right?
Yeah.
But it's trying to be obedient to what God's saying, and I think following Jesus is a really interesting thing, because all of us end up doing things that probably we wouldn't want to do or necessarily would feel like we could do. But like that whole thing of trying to follow Jesus wherever he takes us is always the thing, isn't it? And I guess it's easy to sort of say, well, that means that you're going to end up doing big things, but most of my life is spent trying to follow Jesus in the small things as well. Don't always do a great job of that, but it's about how we accidentally end up in great places when we choose to follow Jesus.
Yeah. maybe there's a book in there.
Yeah.
Enough a book.
Yeah.
Have you got a fun question for me?
I have got a fun question for you, but obviously I haven't given you in advance.
No, it's all right.
What's like a guilty pleasure of yours that you absolutely love doing, but you know that everybody else would be like, oh, I can't believe she loves that?
don't know. I can think of something weird that I like to eat,
What
which
is that?
is probably a good starting point to mention. So I I'm quite partial to a cracker with cheese on,
Yeah.
and a bit of peanut butter and like a pickle as well,
Oh,
like the sweet, salty, savoury
you
mix of
lost
those
lost
three
me at
things.
pickle, but you had me at peanut butter.
Yeah. So cheese and peanut butter is a bit of a weird mix in itself. But yeah, when you throw the pickle in there, it's like an extra weird little thing.
That
Uh,
is weird. Yeah.
yeah.
And probably I don't really want to know anymore now because, like, if that was your sort of like entry level weirdness, it could only get stranger from there, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't even, so I had it a lot when I was pregnant with my daughter, but it wasn't even like a pregnancy weird craving thing because I had it before I was pregnant as well.
Oh, wow.
So um, yeah, that's something. A guilty pleasure. I don't know what else I would say.
Have you got like a
Um,
film that you like go back to time after time that you love?
I don't think I have. I prefer watching like new stuff
Do you?
than old stuff. Like I get quite frustrated when my husband puts on like something that we've already seen because I'm like, I want to watch something new.
Okay. I'm sort of a mixture where I love like new stuff, but then like last night we put on Catch Me If You Can.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
that
like
is a
I've
good
must have
one.
seen that film 100 times,
Yeah,
but sometimes you have to open the loop and just let it play out, and it's
yeah,
mindless, right?
yeah. Oh, I just thought of something else. So we've got one of those little like robot vacuum cleaners,
Okay,
and something I love to do, which is a bit weird, is like sit and watch it do its thing.
very
So
good.
it's supposed to be like a time saving thing. It's supposed to be able to like hoover the room without you needing to do it. But I find myself just sat there like mesmerized by the thing, just going back and forth doing the stripes on the carpet of its little hoovering journey. Um,
So it's
but
taking you more time than if you would just to do it. But
probably yeah. And my husband always catches me sitting there, and he's like, "Oh, what are you doing again? Like sitting there watching it? Like you're supposed to be getting on with other stuff. That's the whole point of having it."
I think I'd be the same though. The
Yeah.
trouble is, we just got a new puppy, and I think that puppy would go nuts. It hates household appliances, full stop. So I think a
Yeah.
robotic vacuum cleaner would be the end of it, really.
Yeah, it probably would. Oh, that's cute about puppy though. What area of youth kids family ministry are you most passionate about and why?
I think I'm most passionate about schools work at the moment, kind
Yeah.
of obviously because of my job.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a narrative amongst churches that schools are closed off and that they don't want any Christian input and that it's really, really hard. And I
Mm,
can understand that narrative because in many cases that is true, but it's like the doors have been closed or barriers have been put up for a reason. And once you actually, if you see a school as a place that's a different culture, it's like when you go overseas to be a missionary in a different nation, you have to learn about the culture, right? You learn the
yeah.
customs, you have to learn the language. And if you do that, you can get invited into community and make a difference there. And I feel like schools are the same. It's just there's so much opportunity for churches
Mm,
to learn the language, to align with school values, to align with school outcomes and the school vision to really make a massive long-term difference for young people and their families. And that's
mm,
what we're seeing all the time. And we're blatantly Christian ethos in what we do. We have a strong distinctive. So like at Easter at the moment, we're just doing across all of our schools, we're talking about Jesus, bringing us the Easter story brings unshakable hope. So we have this unshakable hope campaign that's
mm,
going out. So we're doing some strongly Christian things alongside being a great Christian presence. And the schools we've got a waiting list. And the schools are
mm.
crying out
Wow.
for it. So I feel like I'm passionate about schools work, but I'm passionate about changing that narrative a little bit as well of saying,
Mm,
take a second look, because I think there's a great opportunities in the days ahead.
yeah. And how would you like if you were giving advice for somebody to get involved in their local school? Kind of, what would you say for them to do?
So the first thing I would have a think about what time, energy, and effort you've actually got. So before you go to bat, because you don't want to make a promise that you can't keep. So it's like a dating game, right? So you bring what
Yeah.
you have to the table.
Yeah.
And then I would find out as much as possible about the school. And I would start by reading the latest Ofsted report. So schools are very driven by Ofsted, and whether you agree with it or not, that is the case, certainly at the moment. So I would read the Ofsted report and I'd find out some of the identified needs of, like, even better, these are the ways that the school can improve. And I'd also do a bit of an audit of what you've got within yourself or your team of skills that you can bring to the table or tools that you can access, and try and merge the two. So if you go to a school and say, hello, we want to do RE lessons and we want to do assemblies about Jesus, they might say, no, thank you. But if you go to the school and in the first instance and say, I've noticed that in your Ofsted report, you've got a huge area around well-being. I've got a team of mentors that we can train up using this tool to get this outcome with young people. Can we have a conversation about getting involved? You've got your foot in the door. You're then building relationship. And I always say that you can drive a truck over a bridge of trust. You can drive anything over it. So once you've got the trust, you can build that bridge. Everything moves at the speed of trust. So you can establish that relationship and connection and then begin to expand and do more. And I think there's so much power in just being there for staff, being there for students, and being that Christian presence where often there isn't any. It's just there's so many opportunities. So that's where I would start. I would start where the needs of the school are, and I would see how can you serve that school and meet the needs of that school. And that opens the door for loads of opportunities.
Yeah. And just going back to what you said before about the misconception that, like, schools are closed, and I guess the other misconception is that they're very secular places and there's no room or space for God anymore. What would you kind of say are some of the opportunities we can get involved?
I think there's opportunity. So if you have any understanding of the Ofsted framework and what schools are required to do, so there's loads of areas, particularly under the strand called personal development. So personal development covers character, it covers values, it covers the development of the whole person, and it covers something called SMSC, which is spiritual, moral, social, and cultural development. And it covers well-being, and it covers pastoral support. Well, within that whole area of personal development, there's a huge range of things that the church can offer, from being a listening ear to just being, some very basic mentoring skills, being listening ear for young people. That's one thing. So you can get trained up to be, say, a TLG mentor or something. There's loads of tools out there. So that's kind of like what we'd call like deep work, like one-to-one work, all the way through to running enrichment opportunities for young people to support with well-being, offering some sort of listening post, mental health support, offering to support the school with some of their cultural opportunities where maybe you can go and be the Christian voice into that, because schools have to deliver religious education. It's statutory. They have to deliver that. Even if they're not doing the RE GCSE, they have to deliver some sort of religious education to their young people as part of a broad and balanced curriculum. So you want to be looking for opportunities within RE. Something else called British Values, which is something which the government was a buzzword a few years ago, but it's still right at the top of the agenda. Part of that is respect. So how can churches help young people align with the whole area of respect? How can they support young people in that way? And also, I hate this word, but tolerance of faith. And I hate the word tolerant because it's like, we're just going to be tolerant of you. But within that means basically you can say, we can bring a Christian perspective on almost anything. So as a Christians, we can be bringing a Christian perspective into English, into history, into geography, into all sorts of things. And the issues of the day, we have something to say about them. What has God got to say about race? What has God got to say about mental health? What has God got to say about the changing culture with young people, social media, cost of living? There's things that Christians can say, and schools have a requirement to be able to bring that perspective, but also with a trusted person, they long to do that as well. There's great opportunities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think that's really helpful. And why, Dave, do you think engaging children and young people and church is really important?
I think it's so vital, isn't it, to understand that God is intergenerational, multi-generational God. So he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, even in his name in the Old Testament, he's like, hey guys, I'm this multi-generational God. And I think the Bible says that one generation will tell of your deeds to another. So there's this thread, there's this story that's being retold throughout history. And what we do when we're working with children, when we're working with young people, essentially we're retelling the story into a culture that no longer has any other opportunity to hear it unless we tell it. We have to repackage, we have to reimagine, we have to recommunicate stuff. Otherwise, we end up like we're speaking on a Zoom call, but we're on mute, and people at the other end, they're not really listening and not bothering to tell us we're on mute.
Yeah.
So we have to retell the story and help make it relevant. But at the same time, it is the eternal story that's always about faith, hope, and love, which every generation longs for. So that's why it's important, because it's on God's heart first, right?
Yeah.
And then he puts it onto ours.
Yeah, totally. And I think there's sometimes a misconception amongst children and young people and people who aren't part of church, isn't there, from Christians who think, oh, people are quite closed off and they don't want to know. There was a surge in atheism, wasn't there, quite a few years ago? But I think that has sort of come down quite a lot from some of the latest stats that are out there. And I think mine and a lot of people, and you probably agreed, that actually young people themselves are quite open to understanding and thinking and coming to terms with the fact that they actually have a choice about what they believe, and actually to be informed to make that choice properly. Like, there need to be Christians in the mix who are sharing what they believe, so that those young people can have the opportunity to make that choice for themselves.
Yeah, and I think it's about how do we create space for that, and where do we create spaces? So we've just done this survey with 1,000 young people across all of our partner schools, and it's mainly about social media, digital world. But one of the things that we asked was, where's your go-to source for information about how you develop your faith? So there's loads of options like websites, social media, influencers, community groups, parents. But do you know what the number one thing young people said was?
What did they say?
School.
Yeah. Wow.
They said young people are looking to school and teachers to help teach them about faith. Came up number one. And it makes sense because, they're no longer part of a faith community. A lot of parents don't have that background themselves. So we're now dealing with a generation that are growing up who are saying if they want to find out faith, they're not going to go to a website, because what website do they go to? They don't know any social influencers because the algorithm doesn't show them that. So actually they're looking to schools first and foremost to help them develop their faith, which we thought was fascinating.
Yeah. That is really fascinating. And Dave, do you want to share anything about any of the books that you've written or the resources and stuff that you've got out there that people could use for their ministry?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of things to say. So the first thing is I've just released a book with 10 of those publishing called Like or Follow, what every teenager needs to decide about Jesus. And it's a short book that is basically written to help young people who've got no faith background or very little faith background engage with who Jesus is. And most resources quite religious in their language, often the starting point's quite further down the scale, but this is really easy and accessible. And it's written to help young people understand that Jesus is real, that he's relevant, that he's a reflection of what God's like. So if we want to know what God's like, look at Jesus. That he's our rescuer, that he's our revolutionary who can lead us into a sense of purpose and identity. And he's also a relationship as well. So it gives you a much more 360-degree view of Jesus than most of the stuff, which is just like, Jesus came at Christmas, he was born, Jesus died at Easter, he died, and not a lot in between. And often, how do you actually land that in your life? So that's that Like or Follow. The cool thing for youth is that from the 10 of those website, you get it for like a $5 for one copy, but they do bulk deals.
Okay.
So I just got 100 for £100, so like £1 each. So they're really good value. And we just did there's a young adults conference in Liverpool that we're giving them out at the weekend, and we're looking at getting them out in different places around the country because they're so accessible. Because 10 of those as a publisher, their idea is to be evangelistic. I'm not doing it sort of like make money or make a name for myself. It's done as a resource for people like who actually need it, So there's that. And then linked into that is probably Clear Series, which I know that you've looked at before on your blog. I think we've got a blog on there.
Yeah, we've promoted it on the Youthwork Plus thing, yeah.
Clear Series is a resource which again is designed to help young people start spiritual conversations from any starting point. So if you go on to either YouTube, find it Clear Series, the website kleerseries.com. We've also got Urban Saints, Scripture Union, Youth for Christ resources. So everywhere where you've already got access to those places like Energize, you'll find Clear Series already there as well. So it's well worth people knowing about that.
Yeah, great. And how can people get involved with Grace Foundation if they want to find out more or pray or come work for you? Or
so check out our website, grace-foundation.org.uk. I was laughing with Becky earlier. We're probably one of the organisations that seems to always be recruiting youth workers. So youth work, family support, leadership roles in schools. We often have jobs that come up as we continue to expand, especially in the Milton Keynes area. We just filled all of our posts recently, thanks to you guys partly. But it's worth just, if you're interested in that for the future, just give us your CV. Just, we'll keep you on file. But if you want to find out more about the work of Grace Foundation, just go onto the website, and we'd love to help you find out anything you want. Follow us on social media as well.
Yeah, that'd be good. And lastly, Dave, what advice or encouragement would you give for any of our youth or kids leaders who are listening?
Keep going. It's, as we talked about earlier, there are some difficult days. There are some challenging seasons, especially when it feels like sometimes that the adults around you aren't getting it and aren't listening. I, as a teenager myself, was somebody who was profoundly impacted by youth work, and that has led me on to change my life and hopefully make a difference for others as well. So there are hundreds and thousands of young people out there. You don't have to have a massive ministry. You don't have to have a big youth group. It's all about, stopping for the one like Jesus did. And if you'd be willing to stop for the one, who knows where it could end up.
Yeah. Good advice. So thanks, Dave. It's been great to catch up with you today and find out a bit more about your journey and a bit more about Grace Foundation and a bit more about how people can get involved in schools. I think that was really useful stuff. And yeah, if you've been listening today, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It helps not only you find us again, but it helps with all the algorithms for other people to find us. And yeah, if you want to get in touch with Dave, you can always contact us at Youthwork Plus if you can't find their stuff. But yeah, we'll put some links for their social media stuff on our Instagram so that you can find them. And I'll try and put a post for Dave's new book as well on there so that you can find that easily too. But yeah, thanks loads, Dave. It's been great to have you today.
Thanks so much for having me. I love what you guys are doing, and keep going, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thank you for listening, everyone. And we'll catch you on the next one.